The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the thin soles of her boots and crept up her legs. A slow, numbing invasion. Annabeth huddled on the hard wooden bench of the Red Bank station, pulling a shawl that offered no real warmth against the biting Montana dark. She had been sitting for hours, her body vibrating with a fatigue so deep it felt like a sickness. The station waiting room was empty, save for her and the sleeping station master. His chair tilted back against the wall by the pot-bellied stove, which had long since gone cold. The air smelled of stale tobacco, coal dust, and the sharp, clean scent of the coming snow. She had fought the sleep. She had paced the small room until her legs ached, counted the cracks in the ceiling, read and reread the shipping manifests tacked to the wall. But the exhaustion, born of 3 days without rest and a fear that gnawed at her insides, finally won. Her head had nodded. Her eyes, heavy and burning, had closed. Just for a minute, she told herself, just to rest them from the sting of the wind. When she woke, it was to a silence that was absolute. The rhythmic ticking of the station clock was gone, replaced by the hollow moan of the wind outside. The station master was standing, stretching his arms over his head. Annabeth shot to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. "The train? The night train?" The man, gray-bearded and weary, finished his stretch before turning to her. He gestured with his thumb toward the empty tracks, dark lines disappearing into the black. "That was it, miss, come and gone a half-hour ago." The words struck her like a physical blow. No, I was right here. It didn't whistle." "Whistles when it comes, not when it leaves," he said, not unkindly, but with the flat finality of a man who dealt in schedules. He began banking the stove, preparing to close. "You must have been sleeping hard." When is the next one?" she whispered, the words catching on the panic rising in her. "Tuesday morning, 2 days from now." He looked at her then, really looked at her, at the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the threadbare shawl, the desperation in her eyes. "You got a place to stay, miss? The hotel's closed up. Nearest boarding house is a mile walk." Annabeth's hand went to the small reticule tied at her waist. She didn't need to open it. She knew exactly what was inside. 12 cents and a silver locket she could not bring herself to sell. Not enough for a meal, let alone a room for 2 nights. I was meeting someone," she lied, the words tasting like ash. The station master shrugged, turning back to the stove. "Well, you can't stay here. I'm locking up." Annabeth stumbled back and sat hard on the bench. 2 days. The air left her lungs. She was stranded. The station master's indifferent stare triggered something in her memory. Another man, sitting high above her, looking down with that same dispassionate gaze. The court finds these accusations, brought by a woman of questionable reputation. A tremor ran through her, one that had nothing to do with the cold. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the images came anyway. The heavy, polished wood of the courtroom, the sea of faces all turned toward her, the whispers that followed her like stray dogs. "Liar, shameless. Did you see the dress she wore?" She remembered the grip of hands on her arms, not gentle, dragging her from a room. She remembered the scent of whiskey and expensive bay rum, a scent that now made her stomach heave. She remembered her father's face, cold and shut, as he told her she was no longer welcome. The sound of the front door of her own home locking against her. "You have ruined us," her mother had whispered, her face pale and unforgiving. "After all we've done for you." Annabeth opened her eyes, gasping, her breath frosting in the frigid air. The station master was pulling on a heavy coat. "Time to go, miss." She stood on trembling legs, her mind blank. She could not go back. She could not stay. There was nowhere on earth for her. She walked out onto the loading platform, the wind hitting her full force, stealing what little breath she had left. It carried the sharp bite of pine and the heavy promise of a blizzard. The town of Red Bank was little more than a dark smudge against the looming mountains. A sound made her turn, the crunch of heavy wheels on hard-packed snow. A large freight wagon, drawn by a team of 4 broad-backed mules, was pulling up to the platform. A man sat at the reins, a dark shape against the dying light. He didn't look at her. He pulled the brake, the sound loud in the quiet, and climbed down. He moved with a stiff, economical grace, walking to the back of the wagon. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a hat pulled low, obscuring his face. The station master came out, carrying a lantern and a clipboard. "Took you long enough. Colton. Thought you'd wait for the storm." "Had to shoe the lead mule," the man named Colton replied. His voice was low and rough, like gravel stirred in a bucket. He began unloading crates, stacking them on the platform. He moved with a steady, relentless rhythm, ignoring the cold, ignoring her. Annabeth huddled by the station door, a ghost he refused to see. When he finished, he signed the station master's sheet. As he turned to go, the lantern light caught his face. Annabeth instinctively took a step back. His left cheek was marked by a scar, a puckered white line that ran from the corner of his eye down to his jaw. Pulling the skin tight, another scar, darker and ridged, disappeared into the high collar of his shirt. He was not a man who had lived an easy life. He settled the station master. Then his gaze, gray and flat as a winter sky, landed on her. He stared for a long moment. It was not the stare she was used to, not the leering appraisal of the men in her town, nor the pitying glances of the women. It was just a look, an assessment. He saw the thin shawl. He saw the way she shivered, her arms wrapped around herself. He saw the tracks, empty. "You waitin' on the Tuesday train?" he asked. She could only nod, her teeth chattering. He looked up at the sky, which was now a bruised, heavy purple. "You'll freeze 4 then." He said nothing else for a long time. He climbed back up onto the wagon seat, gathered the reins, and looked down at her, one last time. "I'm hauling this lumber west, through the pass, to the new mines." He gestured with his head to the empty space beside him. "Got space, if you want it." Annabeth's blood ran colder than the air. A ride, from a stranger, a scarred, rough man, heading into the wilderness. Everything in her screamed no. The memory of the last man she had trusted, a man with a handsome face and a smooth voice, rose up to choke her. She shook her head. I can't." He shrugged, as if it made no difference to him. "Suit yourself." He released the brake. The wagon lurched forward. Annabeth watched it go. She felt the first tiny, stinging flake of snow land on her cheek. Then another. The wind howled, a hungry, lonely sound. She thought of 2 days, 48 hours, of the cold seeping into her bones until her heart stopped, of being found, stiff and blue, on a station bench. "Wait!" The word was torn from her, thin and desperate. The wagon stopped. The man didn't turn. He just waited. She ran, stumbling on the icy platform. She reached the tall wheel, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get a grip. This was madness. This was a mistake, but it was the only choice she had. He offered no help. She grabbed the sideboard, put her boot on the iron step, and hauled herself up, her skirts tangling around her legs. She fell onto the wooden seat, breathless and humiliated. The wagon started moving again before she was settled. The silence on the trail was worse than the silence at the station. It was huge, weighed down by the pressing darkness and the sheer, empty expanse of the land around them. The only sounds were the steady plodding of the mules, the jingle of their harnesses, and the relentless creak of the wagon wheels. They sat side by side, a foot of cold air between them. Annabeth kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her body rigid. She was terribly aware of him, of the bulk of his shoulder, the way his hands, wrapped in worn leather gloves, held the reins with an easy, competent grip. She stared straight ahead, into the gloom. The trail was barely visible. 2 ruts climbing into the foothills. The mountains loomed over them, black shapes that blotted out the stars. She snuck a glance at his profile. The hat was still pulled low, but she could see the hard line of his jaw, the tension in it. The scar was a pale slash in the dark. He didn't look at her. He just drove, his eyes on the trail, searching for markers she could not see. The cold was finding new ways to attack her. The wind cut straight through her shawl and dress. Her shivering became uncontrollable, a violent shaking that rattled her bones. After an hour, the snow began to fall in earnest. Not light flakes, but thick, wet clumps that immediately began to coat the path, the trees, and her own shoulders. The world was turning white. The man, Colton, muttered a curse at the sky. He pulled the wagon to a brief halt. Annabeth tensed, wondering if he was going to order her off. He didn't look at her. He just shrugged out of his coat. It was a heavy thing, canvas lined with thick sheepskin. The sudden absence of it revealed the worn flannel shirt beneath and the hard muscles of his back and shoulders. He dropped the coat, heavy and warm, onto her lap. Annabeth flinched, staring at it. "Take it," he said, his voice rough, "or you'll be no use to anyone." She wanted to refuse. It felt like a debt, like an obligation she could not repay. But the coat was so warm. The cold had made her stupid, her fingers numb and useless. She fumbled with it, her movements clumsy. She pulled it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate, and with it came the scent of him. It was not the whiskey and bay rum of her nightmares. It was pine smoke, leather, horses, and the faint, clean smell of the cold itself. It was the smell of the wild. The coat was huge on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem pooling around her feet. She buried her face in the high collar, and for the first time in days, the shaking in her limbs began to quiet. He clicked to the mules, and the wagon moved on. They traveled for what felt like an eternity, climbing higher into the mountains. The trail became a twisting, narrow ledge. The wind screamed through the pines, and the trees themselves groaned and creaked under the weight of the new snow. Annabeth closed her eyes, trying to pretend she was somewhere else, anywhere else. Finally, just as she felt she could not endure another moment, he pulled the team off the path, guiding them toward a dark shadow in the rock face. It was a deep overhang, a shallow cave carved by wind and time, offering shelter from the worst of the storm. He set the brake and climbed down. "We'll stop here. Storm's closing the pass." He worked with a quiet efficiency that was almost hypnotic. He unhitched the mules, leading them deeper under the rock. He rubbed them down with canvas sacks, murmuring to them in that low, rough voice. He fed them from a bag of oats. Annabeth stayed on the wagon seat, clutching the coat around her. She felt useless, a piece of cargo he was forced to accommodate. When the animals were settled, he came back to the wagon and pulled a canvas tarp from under the seat, along with an axe and a bedroll. He began gathering dry wood from the recesses of the overhang, branches protected from the snow. Within minutes, he had a small, bright fire crackling to life. The flames pushed back the oppressive dark, painting the rock walls in shades of orange and red. He dropped the bedroll near the fire. Then he took a rifle from a scabbard on the wagon. He glanced at her. "You can come down." She climbed down slowly, her legs stiff and aching. She stood awkwardly by the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth, feeling the blood sting as it returned to her fingers. He offered her nothing else. No food, no words. He checked the rifle, the metallic click-clack of the action loud in the small space. Then he walked to the mouth of the overhang, leaning against the rock, staring out into the swirling snow, a silent sentinel. After a long time, he turned. "You should sleep. We leave at first light, if the snow lets us." He gestured to the bedroll. "Take it." She looked from the bedroll to him. "There was only one, and you?" I don't sleep much. He walked past her, not to the fire, but to the far wall of the overhang. He sat with his back against the cold stone, pulling his hat low over his eyes. He settled the rifle across his lap, his hands resting on the stock. Annabeth stared at him. He had chosen the cold. He had chosen the hard rock, the watchman's post, while giving her the fire and the bed. Slowly, she unlaced her frozen boots, her fingers clumsy on the knots. She set them by the fire to dry. She lay down on the bedroll, pulling his heavy coat over her like a blanket. The wool was rough against her cheek, but the fire was warm, and the ground, for the first time, felt solid beneath her. She lay on her side, watching him. He did not move. He was a silhouette against the snowy mouth of the cave, a man made of scars and silence. Why? The question echoed in her tired mind. He had asked for nothing. He had not touched her, had barely spoken. He had given her his coat and his bed. This simple, blunt kindness was more confusing than the cruelty she had fled. Cruelty. She understood. She knew its shape, its smell, its terrible, predictable language. This, she did not. She wondered what those scars were from. A fight? An animal? She wondered why a man like him, so clearly capable, was hauling lumber to a mine instead of working a ranch. She wondered if he was running from something, too. He sat in the cold, rifle in hand, a barrier between her and the howling wilderness. Annabeth closed her eyes. The image of his still form burned against the dark. She was trapped, miles from civilization, with a scarred stranger, and yet, for one fleeting, illogical moment, the knot of terror in her stomach loosened. She was not safe, but she was, for tonight, no longer being hunted. She fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, the sound of the wind mixing with the steady, quiet presence of the man in the shadows. Annabeth woke to the smell of wood smoke and the sharp metallic ring of a harness buckle. The world was a flat, muted gray. For a disorienting moment, she did not know where she was. The rock overhang, the dying embers of the fire, the sight of Colton Reed already harnessing the mules in the snowy dawn, it all rushed back. She had slept in his bedroll, wrapped in his coat. She saw, had not slept at all. He moved with the same stiff, weary purpose as the day before, his back to her, his hat pulled low. She sat up, the cold air instantly biting at her face. Here! He turned as she held out the heavy coat. His eyes were shadowed, his face grim in the pale light. The scars seemed deeper, the skin around them tight. He looked straight through her, his gaze landing on the coat. He took it without a word, shrugging it on, settling its weight on his shoulders as if armoring himself. She climbed out of the bedroll, her stockinged feet landing on the frozen ground. She winced, hurrying to her boots by the fire. They were stiff, the leather still damp, but the proximity to the embers had kept them from freezing solid. As she tugged them on, her fingers clumsy with cold, he walked over. He did not offer to help. He simply handed her a small, hard square of jerky and a piece of ship biscuit. It was dry, tasteless, and felt like chewing on wood. But it was food. It was the first thing she had eaten in nearly 2 days. She devoured it, her pride long since eclipsed by the gnawing hunger in her belly. He drank scalding coffee from a tin cup, then kicked snow over the fire, extinguishing the last of the embers. We go. The day was harder than the one before. The snow had deepened overnight, drifting into great, powdery swells that hid the trail. The mules strained, their breath pluming in the air. Colton got down and walked, leading the team, his voice a low, steady rumble of encouragement and command. Annabeth felt compelled to walk as well, to not be the only burden. She slid down from the wagon seat, her legs sinking to her knees in the fresh powder. She pulled his coat tighter. He had given it back to her again, this time with an impatient gesture, as if her shivering annoyed him. She followed in the deep trough his body made through the snow. The world was silent. The snow muffled every sound, creating a white, breathless void. There was only the grunt of the mules, the creak of the wagon harness, and the rhythmic sucking sound of their own feet pulling free of the drifts. They were in a high pass, the pines thick around them, their branches heavy and bowed. The sky was a low, oppressive sheet of gray, promising more. By midday, the air grew colder, the wind picking up, whipping the fine dry snow into stinging clouds that blinded her. They would not make it over the pass. Colton knew it. He stopped the team, his head raised, sniffing the air like an animal. He looked around, his gaze sharp and assessing. "This'll do," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He led the mules off the trail, into a dense cluster of ancient pines. Their branches grew low to the ground, forming a natural, if imperfect, shelter. The snow beneath them was thinner, the thick needles providing a sparse carpet over the frozen earth. He unhitched the team and set about his tasks. He built a fire, this time with more difficulty. Shielding the new flames with his own body against the wind, he fed the mules, his movements economical, never wasted. Annabeth helped. She gathered dry twigs from beneath the lowest broken branches, her hands red and numb. She brought them to him, and he took them, their fingers brushing. A jolt, quick and sharp as a spark from the flint, passed between them. She snatched her hand back. He did not look up. They sat by the fire, the world beyond their small circle of light a swirling chaos of white. The wind howled through the high branches. The silence, which had been a heavy blanket, now felt thin and brittle. She had to break it, or she felt she might shatter herself. "The station master," she began, her voice hoarse from disuse. He looked up from the flame he was feeding, his gray eyes wary. "He called you Colton," she said. A long pause. "He did." "Is that your name, Colton?" He nodded once. Colton Reed. The name felt strange on her tongue, too personal. "I am Annabeth Monroe." He gave another short nod, as if accepting a piece of cargo. He turned his attention back to the fire. His profile was hard, forbidding. She tried again, needing the sound of a human voice, even his, "Where are you from, Mr. Reed?" "South." "Where's south?" He looked at her then, his eyes flat and cold as the iron wagon wheels. "Just south." The message was clear. The wall was back up. Annabeth fell silent, chastened. She drew her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, and stared into the flames. He had given her his name, but nothing else. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. The snow was a pristine, blinding sheet, piled in immense drifts. The air was colder, but still. The pass was impassable for the wagon. "We'll have to walk them," Colton said. "Lead the mules. I'll handle the wagon brake." The trail here was narrow, cutting across the side of the mountain. To their left, a sheer drop, hidden by the snow. To their right, a steep, rocky incline. Colton led the way, testing the ground. Annabeth followed, leading the first mule, her heart pounding. She was trying to stay in his tracks, but the snow was deep and uneven. Her boot, worn smooth, found no purchase on a patch of ice hidden beneath the powder. Her feet went out from under her. She cried out, a small, sharp sound, as she slid. She did not slide far. The trail was narrow, but a small embankment of soft snow, perhaps 10 feet high, formed the shoulder. She tumbled down it, landing in a deep drift at the bottom, breathless and buried to her waist. Before she had even drawn a breath to panic, he was there. He had moved with a speed that belied his size. He had slid down the embankment, not falling, but in a controlled crouch, and was beside her in an instant. "You hurt?" His voice was a low growl, rough with an urgency that startled her. She looked up, snow clinging to her eyelashes, her hair fallen from its pins. He was kneeling over her, his face inches from hers. The proximity was shocking. "No," she whispered, her chest tight. I don't think so." He did not offer a hand. He put both of his hands on her waist. They were bare, his gloves tucked into his belt. The heat of them was a shock, searing through the thin wool of her dress and the heavy canvas of his coat. He lifted her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. But he did not let go. He stood, and she was standing with him, his hands still locked on her waist. They were chest to chest, so close she could see the churn of emotion in his gray eyes. They were no longer flat, they were stormy. She could see the individual whiskers on his jaw, the way the scar on his cheek pulled the skin tight near his eye. He was breathing hard, his breath frosting in the air between them. The strength in his hands was absolute. It was not violent or rough. It was solid, a grip that held the world steady. Annabeth's own breath caught. She could not look away. The silence of the mountain pressed in on them. The only sound was the soft hush of snow falling from a nearby branch. The moment stretched, tightening like a rawhide rope. He was looking at her, really looking at her, and she saw a flicker of something she could not name. Not desire, not pity, something raw. Then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. He let go, his hands dropping from her as if she had burned him. He stepped back, turning away. "Watch your footing," he said, his voice clipped. He climbed back up the short bank in 3 long strides, his back rigid. He did not look back or offer her a hand. Annabeth stood for a moment, her waist tingling where his hands had been. She felt shaken, not from the fall, but from the contact. She scrambled up the bank, her face hot despite the bitter cold, and took the mule's harness, her hands trembling. They made camp that night in the open. There was no overhang, no sheltering grove, just a flat space he cleared with a shovel from the wagon. The snow piled high around them in a makeshift wall. The fire seemed small, a desperate thing against the vast, cold emptiness of the landscape. The tension from the incident on the trail was thick between them. He had not spoken to her since, had not even looked at her. He seemed angry, though she did not know if it was at her or at himself. He handed her the usual ration of jerky and biscuit. She ate, her stomach churning. The silence was becoming a torment. His kindness, the coat, the food, the way he had caught her, it was all mixed up with his rough silence, his scars, his pain. She had to know. She had to know if he was like the others, if this kindness was just a prelude. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. He didn't look up from the fire. "None of us should be out in this, but we are." "No." She took a shaky breath, forcing the words out. "I mean, I ran away from my home." That got his attention. He didn't turn, but she saw his body go still, his hand freezing on its way to his coffee cup. "There was a man," she said, her voice small and thin. "Back in Illinois. He was important. His father is a judge." She watched his profile. The firelight flickered across his face, making the scar pulse with the flames. He hurt me." She had never said the words aloud to anyone but a disbelieving marshal. "And when I spoke it, he said no one would believe me." She stopped, her body braced for the impact, for the doubt, for the pity, which was worse, for the inevitable turning away. Colton turned his head slowly. He looked at her, his gaze level. His jaw was a hard, sharp line in the firelight. She could see the muscle in it clench. "Jump once, then go tight as stone." He held her gaze. The wind howled, but in their small circle of fire, the world was still. He saw the shame in her eyes, the terror, and the desperate, fragile defiance. "I believe you." He said it simply, 2 words. Not a question, not an expression of sympathy, a statement of fact, as if she had told him the sky was blue or the snow was cold. The breath left her lungs in a rush. Tears, hot and sudden, sprang to her eyes. She had been prepared for anything but this simple, absolute acceptance. She ducked her head, turning away from him, ashamed of the sudden, overwhelming relief that washed over her. It was a relief so profound it felt like pain. He did not press her. He did not ask for details. He simply turned back to the fire, as if the matter was settled. The conversation was over, but in the space of 2 words, the ground beneath them had shifted forever. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in the bedroll, his coat pulled up to her chin, her mind racing. "I believe you," the words echoed, a balm on a wound she thought would never close. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing, red coals. Colton sat in his usual spot, on the far side of the fire, his back against a piled wall of snow, rifle across his knees. He was a statue of vigilance. She closed her eyes, trying to force the sleep that would not come. A sound pulled her back. It was a low, hitching sound, almost lost in the steady moan of the wind. She thought at first it was one of the mules, shifting in the cold. She opened her eyes and looked. His head was bowed, his hat pulled low, casting his face in deep shadow. But she could see his shoulders. They were shaking, just slightly, in a rhythm that was not from the cold. A sound escaped him, a choked, guttural thing that was half grunt, half sob. He stifled it instantly. He was weeping. Annabeth's heart stopped. This man, who seemed carved from mountain rock and ice, was crying. He was crying silently, desperately, in the dark, thinking she was asleep. She did not think. She only moved. She pushed herself out of the warm bedroll. The cold of the snow-packed ground hit her bare feet, stinging, but she barely felt it. She crossed the few feet of open ground that separated them. She knelt beside him in the snow. He did not seem to know she was there. He was lost in whatever darkness held him. She reached out her hand, hesitant, and laid it gently on his shoulder. The reaction was violent. He jerked as if she had stabbed him, scrambling backward, his hand flying to the rifle. His head snapped up. "Don't!" he rasped, his voice breaking. In the dim, dying light of the coals, she saw his face. It was undone. The stoic mask was gone, shattered. His eyes were wide, wet, and filled with a vulnerability so profound it was terrifying. He was ashamed, mortified to be seen. He turned his face away from her, hiding in the shadows of his hat. "Colton," she whispered. Her voice was steady, soft. She did not pull her hand back. She left it in the space between them. He was breathing hard, great, ragged gasps, trying to reclaim his control. The battle was visible in the tension of his neck, the white-knuckled grip on his rifle. "It's the fire," he finally forced out, his voice thick. I don't like the fire." She waited, kneeling in the snow, her hand still outstretched. A long, shuddering sigh escaped him. The words came as if torn from his throat. "My brother." He stared at the coals, but she knew he was seeing something else. "He was younger than me, just 14. His voice dropped to a raw, broken whisper. "It was a barn fire, back home. I was supposed to be watching him. We were supposed to be mucking stalls, but we were playing cards. I left him to get, hell, I don't even remember. Water, a rope, something stupid." He stopped, his throat working. "I told him to wait, just wait. The lantern, it must have tipped. The hay, it went up so fast." He closed his eyes, his whole body tensing. "I heard him yelling." He was silent for so long she thought he would say no more. "I tried to get in," he whispered. "I tried, but the roof, it came down." His hand, the one not on the rifle, came up and unconsciously touched the scar on his cheek. "A beam. It threw me back. I couldn't get to him." He opened his eyes. They were empty. "I blame myself. It should have been me." Annabeth's heart ached. a sharp, physical pain. She had no words. There were no words for a grief that large, that old. She moved her hand, slowly, and laid it on his arm, over the rough flannel, a small, human touch in the vast, freezing dark. He did not pull away this time. He just sat, rigid, breathing in the cold. After a long moment, he finally, slowly, turned his head. His eyes met hers. His gaze was ravaged. She saw the boy he had been, the man he had become, and the raw, unhealed wound that connected them. He saw no judgment in her face, no disgust, only a quiet, terrible understanding, only a reflection of his own sorrow. The moment held, suspended in the night. It was quiet, it was raw, two broken souls, exposed by the light of a dying fire. It was too much for him. He broke the gaze, looking down. He gently, but firmly, took her hand from his arm. His fingers were calloused and surprisingly warm. "Get back to the bedroll," he ordered. The growl was gone from his voice. It was just tired. So deeply tired. "You'll catch your death." She hesitated, unwilling to leave him. "Go on," he said more softly. "Sleep?" She did as he asked. She climbed back into the bedroll, the wool still holding a faint warmth. She turned her back to him, facing the snow wall, giving him the privacy of the shadows. She lay there, her eyes wide open, listening to the wind. She heard him shift, heard the faint scrape of his coat against the snow. She listened to his breathing, waiting for it to even out, but it never did. Sleep finally claimed her, pulling her down into a heavy, uneasy darkness. And she dreamed. The dream was vivid, sharp as ice. She was standing on the trail again. In the deep snow, he was in front of her, his hands on her waist, just as they had been. The snow was falling, thick and silent, blanketing the world. But in the dream, he did not let go. He leaned in. His face was close, his gray eyes clear. The scars were there, but they did not matter. She was not afraid. His lips touched hers. It was not a violent kiss, or a hungry one. It was not the kiss of her nightmares. It was slow, hesitant. It was just warm. A deep, melting warmth against the bitter cold. It tasted of wood smoke and pine and, for one impossible moment, safety. She woke with a sharp intake of breath. Her heart was pounding. The fire was dead ashes. The world was gray with the first bleak light of dawn. She turned. Colton was already on his feet, his back to her, checking the harnesses on the lead mule. He had not slept. He had not moved from his post all night. The snow did not stop. It fell for 2 more days. A relentless, silent siege that buried the world. They pushed on, Colton breaking trail for the mules, Annabeth walking behind the wagon, her body a numb, aching protest. They descended from the high pass, but the lower valleys offered no relief. The wind had turned, carrying a new, razor-sharp edge. The sky was no longer gray. It was a churning, bruised yellow, and the world grew dark long before dusk. Colton stopped the wagon, his head raised, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's here." Annabeth, so tired she could barely stand, did not understand. "What is—" "The blizzard." He pointed, not at the sky, but to a stand of pines a 1/4 mile off the trail. "There, a smoke jack. Looks like a cabin." It was their only chance. He urged the mules into the deep, trackless snow, the wagon lurching and groaning behind them. Annabeth fell, picked herself up, and fell again, her skirts heavy with ice. The cabin was barely a structure at all. It was an old trapper's lean-to, built of rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud that had long since cracked. But it had 4 walls, a roof that was mostly intact, and a stone chimney. It was salvation. Colton forced the door, the wood screaming in protest. The air inside was frigid, smelling of old smoke. cured animal skins, and rodent droppings. But it was still... The wind did not cut. He worked with a desperate, focused energy. He unhitched the mules, leading them into a small, attached shed that must have served as a stable. He gave them the last of the grain. He brought in the bedroll, the supplies, and his axe. Annabeth huddled by the door, watching him. The first true blast of the blizzard hit the cabin, a physical blow that shook the small building. The world outside vanished in a deafening white roar. Colton looked at the small, dark fireplace. "Get out of the coat!" She did as he said. He took it, along with the saddle blankets from the mules, and began stuffing them into the largest cracks in the log walls, sealing them against the wind. He used his axe to break apart a derelict wooden bench for kindling. Within minutes, he had a fire snapping in the hearth. It was a small fire, but it was the most beautiful thing Annabeth had ever seen. The room was tiny, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, a small table, one stool, a rotted frame that might have been a bed, and the fireplace. There was nowhere to go. There was only him. The storm howled. It was a living entity, a monster trying to claw its way in. For the rest of that first day, they barely spoke. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, listening to the assault. The proximity that had been tense on the trail was now a suffocating, unbearable thing. She could not move without brushing against him. She could not look up without meeting his eyes. That night, she sat on the floor, her back against the rough wall, her knees drawn to her chest. He had given her the bedroll. As always, she had refused it. "We can share the warmth," she had said, her voice small. "It is foolish for one to freeze." So they laid the bedroll open on the floor, like a blanket, and sat on top of it. He took the spot closest to the door, his rifle, as always, within reach. The cold was still bone deep. She could not stop shivering. Her feet, soaked through from the walk, felt like blocks of wood. She tried to unlace her boots, but her fingers were numb and useless, the leather laces frozen stiff. She gave up, a small, frustrated sob catching in her throat. He watched her for a moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, he moved. He knelt in front of her. "Give them here." Annabeth flinched, pulling her legs back. "I can do it." "No, you can't," he said, his voice flat. He did not wait for permission. He took her foot, boot and all, and set it firmly in his lap. His hands, calloused and scarred from the rains and the fire, were surprisingly gentle. He worked at the frozen lace. His head bowed. Annabeth watched the firelight play over his dark hair. She watched the tension in his shoulders as he concentrated on the small, impossible knot. He did not use a knife, though it would have been faster. He was patient, picking at the ice with his fingernails until the lace finally gave way. He slid the boot from her foot. Her sock was soaked. He peeled it off, his touch businesslike, and set it by the fire to steam. Then he looked at her foot. It was pale, the skin puckered and white with cold. He did not say anything. He simply cupped her heel in one hand and began to rub. His thumb pressed into her arch. His palm moved over her toes, forcing the blood back, bringing a stinging, agonizing warmth. Annabeth bit her lip to keep from crying out. It was not a sensual touch. It was practical. It was life-saving, but it was also the most intimate thing she had ever known. He was holding her, touching her bare skin, with a tenderness she had not known existed. He finished with the first foot and moved to the second, unlacing the boot and stripping the sock with the same methodical care. He rubbed her left foot until it, too, was stinging and red. He set her foot down on the bedroll and looked up. His eyes met hers in the firelight. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded, his throat working. He moved back to his side of the room, putting the wall of air between them once more. But the space was changed. He had touched her, and they both knew it. The second day, the storm was worse. The snow had piled halfway up the single and small window, plunging the cabin into a perpetual, gray twilight. The wind screamed, a high, thin sound that frayed the nerves. They had been clean for weeks, but the grime of the trail, the sweat, and the smoke had become unbearable. Annabeth felt dirty, her skin crawling. Colton must have felt it too. He spent the morning melting snow in their small cookpot, filling the larger, rusted basin they had found in the corner. He poured the steaming water into it, then added more snow to cool it. He did not look at her. He took a thin, worn blanket from his pack, one he used for the mules, and strung it up on a length of rope, creating a small partition in the center of the tiny room. "You first," he said, gesturing to the basin. He handed her a small nub of lye soap. Annabeth stared at the blanket. It was a flimsy, pathetic barrier. He would be 3 feet away. He would hear everything. "Colton," she began, her voice trembling. "I will be at the door," he said, cutting her off. He walked to the cabin door, turning his back to the room. He unlatched it, letting a sliver of the raging white storm into the cabin, and stood there, facing the wind, one hand braced on the doorframe. He was guarding her, both from the world and from himself. Her hands shook as she undressed behind the blanket. The air was cold, but the steam from the basin rose to meet her. She stepped in, using the small scrap of cloth she had for washing. The sound of the water, the splash as she dipped the cloth, the soft sigh that escaped her as the hot water hit her skin. It all seemed impossibly loud in the small space. She was naked, vulnerable, with only a thin piece of wool separating her from a man she barely knew, a man she had dreamed of. She washed quickly, her heart pounding. She scrubbed the dirt from her skin, the fear from her mind. She tried to be silent, but it was impossible. She watched his silhouette. He did not move. He was a statue of iron, his back to her, facing the blizzard. He was giving her his trust. When she was done, she dressed in her spare clothes, her fingers fumbling on the buttons. I am finished." He closed the door, the latch clicking shut with a terrible finality. He turned, his face unreadable in the dim light. He did not look at her. He just gestured for her to take the stool by the fire. He picked up the basin of gray water, opened the door, and threw it into the white oblivion. Then he refilled it, melting more snow. He disappeared behind the blanket. Now it was her turn. She sat on the stool, her back to the partition, and stared into the fire. She heard the splash of water, the sound of his rough breathing. She heard him curse softly as the lye soap stung his skin. She squeezed her eyes shut, her face burning. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. They were two people, trapped, shedding their defenses in the same small space. She felt as if the cabin walls were shrinking, pressing them closer and closer until they had no air left to breathe. That night, the tension was a living thing. It was a third person in the room, huddled by the fire with them. The storm had not abated. They ate their sparse meal of jerky and hardtack in a silence that crackled with unspoken things. She had to break it. The silence was louder than the wind. She looked at him. He was staring into the fire, his face hard, lost in the memory of the barn, of his brother. She knew it. He was seeing the flames, not the hearth. "Colton," she said softly. He started, his head snapping toward her. "The way you touched my feet," she began, then stopped, her face flushing. "It was gentle. You are a gentle man." He gave a harsh, bitter laugh. "I am not." He held up his hands, showing her the scars on his knuckles, the calluses. "These hands, they break things." "They were gentle with me." He looked away, back to the fire, his jaw tight. Annabeth took a breath. He had told her his wound. She would show him hers, the one that did not show. That man, the judge's son, he was not gentle. Colton went perfectly still. After, she corrected herself. unable to say the word. I was sick for a long time. The doctor, my mother finally called a doctor. She was twisting a piece of her skirt in her hands, her knuckles white. He said what was done. It did damage. He said I will never. She looked up, her eyes wide and bright with unshed tears, and forced the words out into the small, warm room. I cannot have children. Colton, I am barren. She said it, the ugly, final word, the brand that had been placed on her. She waited for him to recoil, to look at her with pity, or with the disgust that meant she was no longer a woman. Colton did not move for a long, long time. The only sound was the fire spitting and the wind screaming, trying to get in. He stared deep into the flames, as if searching for an answer in them. His face was a mask of old pain. She saw the scar on his cheek pull tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she almost did not hear it. It was rough and thick with an emotion she could not name. I killed my brother, he whispered. The fire. It was my fault. I am a man who burns things. Annabeth, I destroy. Everything I am supposed to protect, I burn. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes were full of the same broken, ravaged grief she had seen that night on the trail. I have been terrified to touch another soul, he said, his voice raw. Terrified I would leave nothing but ashes. He looked at her confession, at her own brokenness, and he saw not a damaged woman, but a kindred spirit. Then maybe, he said, his voice dropping, so soft it was almost a prayer, maybe you're the only woman I could ever touch, and not fear breaking. The words hung in the air. They were the most devastating, beautiful words she had ever heard. He was not rejecting her. He was matching her. He was saying her wound fit his. Annabeth's breath hitched. She did not think. She only felt. She slid across the floor, the few feet that separated them, and knelt before him. She reached out a trembling hand and touched his face. She laid her fingers against the puckered, angry scar on his cheek. He flinched, his eyes squeezing shut, but he did not pull away. You are not a destroyer, she whispered, her thumb stroking the rough skin. He opened his eyes. They were gray and stormy, full of a hunger and a loneliness so vast it matched her own. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to flee. She did not. His lips touched hers. It was hesitant. It was slow. A question. His lips were chapped, rough, and tasted of coffee and smoke. She pressed back. A silent answer. The hesitation shattered. It was as if the blizzard outside had finally broken through the walls and entered the cabin. All the pent-up tension, the stolen glances, the fear, the loneliness, the dream of the kiss in the snow, it all ignited. His hand came up, burying itself in her hair, pulling the pins free. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her hard against him. He was desperate, starving. His kiss was not gentle now. It was deep and hot and consuming. It was a drowning man's grasp for air. Annabeth clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. She met his hunger with her own. This was not the violation of her nightmares. This was a choice. This was a fire. She felt his strength, the hard muscles of his chest, the rough scrape of his jaw against her skin as he kissed her throat. She gasped, her head falling back. And then, just as suddenly, he stopped. He tore himself away, his hands dropping her as if she were burning him. He scrambled back, putting a foot of space between them. He was breathing in great, ragged gasps, his eyes wide with a kind of horror. No, he rasped, his voice a choked sound. Colton, she whispered, confused and aching. He would not look at her. He stared at his own hands. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. I can't. He stood up, pacing the tiny room like a caged wolf. Not like that. Not like an animal. He stopped at the fireplace, bracing his hands on the rough stone mantel. his back to her. His whole body was rigid with the force of his control. "You deserve gentleness," he said, his voice thick. You deserve better than that, better than me." He did not turn around. He did not speak again. Annabeth sat on the floor, her body trembling, her lips still stinging from his kiss. He had stopped. He had stopped for her. He had stopped because he was afraid of hurting her, afraid of being the man who had broken her. He slept by the door that night, as far from her as the cabin would allow, his rifle in his lap, but neither of them slept. The air was electric, charged with the storm of what had passed between them, and the terrible, aching question of what would happen next. The third day, the storm still raged. The silence in the cabin was absolute. They did not look at each other. They did not speak. The tension had been stretched so tight it had to break. Colton spent the day methodically cleaning his rifle, his movements jerky and precise. Annabeth sat and mended his coat, the one she had worn, her stitches small and tight. They were two people pretending to be busy, while the world ended around them. Night fell. The third night. He took his place by the door. She laid out the bedroll by the fire. The space between them was a chasm. He had stopped for her. He had stopped to protect her. Now, she understood. He would not be the one to cross that line again. He was too afraid of his own fire. If it was to be crossed, it had to be her. Her choice, her body, her decision. She stood up. Her legs were trembling. Her heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. She was terrified. Not of him, of the memories, of the pain. But she was more afraid of being alone. She walked across the room. He heard her and looked up, his face guarded, wary. She did not speak. She knelt in front of him, just as she had the night before. His rifle lay across his lap, a barrier. She reached out, her hand shaking, and gently, deliberately, she lifted the heavy rifle from his knees and set it on the floor beside them. His breath hitched. "Annabeth," he whispered. It was a warning, a plea. I am not made of glass," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am not afraid of you, Colton." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar. I am so cold." It was the only truth she had. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, looking for any sign of fear, of coercion. He found none. He found only need, a need that mirrored his own. He raised a trembling hand and touched her hair. I don't want to hurt you." "You won't," she whispered. "You are the only one who won't." He pulled her to him. The kiss this time was not the violent explosion of the night before. It was slow. It was tender. It was trembling with fear and hesitation. He undressed her slowly, by the firelight, his rough hands learning the shape of her. She flinched when his hand grazed her thigh, the memory rising up, sharp and sudden. He froze instantly, pulling his hand back. "I'm sorry, we can—" "No." She grabbed his hand, the scarred, strong hand, and placed it back on her skin. "No, stay." She guided his hand. She kissed his calloused palms. She whispered her fears against his throat. And he whispered his own back. He told her about the fire, about the guilt that marked him. She told him about the courtroom, about the shame that had followed her. It was tender. It was painful. It was emotional. It was two broken, jagged-edged people trying to fit together without shattering. He moved slowly, his body asking permission at every turn. And she answered, her hands guiding him. Her voice a low murmur of reassurance. It was a reclamation. It was a healing. When he finally came to her, it was with a gentleness that was so profound, so full of reverence, that it brought tears to her eyes. It was not a taking, it was a finding. Afterward, they lay tangled in the bedroll, in the warm glow of the dying fire. The storm still howled outside, a distant, angry moan, but inside, it was quiet. He held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her, his face buried in her hair. She lay against his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart, the knot of fear that had lived in her stomach for so long. The cold dread that had woken her every night was gone. For the first time since she had left Illinois, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt safe. But as she drifted off to sleep, his arms a shield around her, she knew the blizzard outside the cabin was not yet over, and the storm inside of them, the pasts they were fleeing, was only just beginning to calm. The blizzard broke on the fourth morning. The silence that fell over the world was heavy, absolute, as if the storm had scoured all sound from the sky. When Annabeth awoke, she was cocooned in the bedroll, pressed against Colton. His arm was thrown heavily over her waist, his body a solid, warm wall against her back. He was asleep, truly asleep. For the first time she had witnessed, the exhaustion of the past days, combined with the emotional release of the night, had finally claimed him. She lay still, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. The fire was a bed of gray-white ashes. The cold in the tiny cabin was sharp, but where their bodies touched, she was warm. She listened to the slow, deep rhythm of his breathing. In sleep, the hard lines of his face had softened. The tension around his eyes was gone. The scar on his cheek just a pale mark, not an emblem of his pain. She felt a surge of tenderness so fierce it stole her breath. It was a terrifying, fragile thing, this new feeling. It was not just safety, it was possession. He was hers, and she was his, in a way that had no name. When he finally stirred, his body tensing as consciousness returned, he did not pull away. He simply held her tighter for a moment, his face pressed into her hair, breathing her in. A long, shuddering sigh escaped him. Then, the world returned. "The snow stopped," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. They dug the wagon out. It was brutal, back-breaking work. The snow had drifted against the cabin and the shed, burying the wagon up to the wheel hubs in a solid, heavy mass. He had one shovel. Annabeth used a broken piece of the shed door as a scoop. They worked in silence, a new, comfortable silence that replaced the tension of the days before. They moved as a team. He broke the heavy, crusted drifts, and she cleared the lighter powder. He did not treat her as a fragile thing. He let her work, let her sweat and grunt with the effort. And when she slipped on a patch of ice, he caught her arm, steadied her, and let go. It took them half the day. When the wagon was finally free, they hitched the weary mules. He loaded their meager supplies. He turned to her, and for a moment, he just looked. He raised a hand, his glove rough, and brushed a stray piece of straw from her hair. His fingers lingered for a second on her cheek. "We best go," he said. The landscape that emerged from the blizzard was harsher than before. The snow had hidden the true nature of the land. Now, they followed a trail that wound along the edges of sheer cliffs, the rock face coated in glittering, treacherous ice. They crossed creeks that were not fully frozen, the wagon wheels cracking the thin sheets, plunging into the frigid, rushing water below. Colton would curse, leap down into the stream, and put his shoulder to the wheel, his legs submerged in the numbing cold, until the wagon found purchase on the far bank. Annabeth would have the fire going before he even had the mules unhitched, his coat and boots steaming as he huddled by the flames, shivering violently. One night, the wind carried a new sound, a high, thin cry that was answered by another, and then another. Annabeth's head snapped up. "Wolves," Colton said. He did not seem alarmed, merely aware. He built the fire higher that night, its flames leaping red against the snow. He kept his rifle across his lap, and he sat with his back to the rock, pulling her close, settling her between his legs, his arms wrapped around her. She listened to the howling, distant but clear. She should have been terrified, but pressed against his chest, his chin resting on the top of her head, She felt only the steady beat of his heart. She slept, and he kept watch. They traveled for 3 more days, the world a vast, empty expanse of white and gray. They were running low on food. The mules were tiring. On the 4th day, they crested a low rise, and below them, nestled in a fold of the hills, was a town. It was little more than a single, muddy street, lined with perhaps a dozen false-fronted buildings. A plume of wood smoke rose from a stone chimney. "Gable's Post," Colton said. His voice was tight. "I know a woman here, a widow, her husband, Jed, I helped him build his house. She'll give us shelter." Relief washed over Annabeth, so potent it made her dizzy. A roof, a real bed, warm food. They led the wagon into town. The few people on the street, a trapper loading pelts. 2 men outside the saloon stopped to watch them. Their stares were curious, then sharp. Annabeth felt the old, familiar shame rise up. She, a disheveled woman, riding with a scarred, armed man. She pulled the collar of his coat higher, hiding her face. Colton pulled the wagon up to a small, neat house at the end of the street, set back from the others. A woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She was in her 40s, her face lined with grief but her eyes kind. "Colton Reed?" she said, her voice full of surprise. "My lord, I thought you were dead." "Not yet, Martha," he said, climbing down from the wagon. He was stiff, his legs still aching from the frozen creaks. "This is Annabeth. We got caught in the blizzard. We need a place for the night, just the barn, and maybe to buy some feed for the mules." Martha Thorne looked from Colton's hard, scarred face to Annabeth, who was huddled under the heavy coat, her own face smudged with soot and exhaustion. She saw the way Colton stood, not quite in front of Annabeth, but shielding her. "The barn?" Martha said, bustling down the steps. "Nonsense. You'll freeze. You'll both come inside. You look half dead. Child." Annabeth slid down, her legs trembling. The widow's kindness was almost too much. She led them inside, into a home that was warm and smelled of baking bread and apples. "You get yourselves by the fire," Martha ordered. "I'll fetch some broth. Colton, you can take the mules to the livery. Tell Hiram I said to put it on my account." "I can pay," Colton said, his voice rough. "I'm sure you can, but Jed would never forgive me if I let you pay for feed after what you did for us. Now go. The girl needs tending." Colton left, and Annabeth was alone with the widow. "That's a hard man. Colton Reed," Martha said, ladling broth into a bowl. "But there isn't a better one in this territory. He near killed himself pulling my Jed from that collapsed mine shaft. Stayed with him till the end." She handed the bowl to Annabeth, who took it with shaking hands. The hot broth was a shock, scalding her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. "You're running from something," Martha said. It was not a question. Annabeth looked up, her eyes wide. "It's all over you, child. That kind of fear don't come from just a snowstorm." Martha sighed, sitting opposite her. "Don't worry, I ain't one to gossip. You're safe here. You're with Colton. That means something." But they were not safe. The next morning, Colton went to the general store for supplies. Annabeth, wanting to be useful, went with him. The moment they stepped inside, the conversation around the Cracker Barrel stopped. A man in a checkered suit, a drummer by the look of him, was reading a newspaper. He looked up, his eyes passing over Colton, then landing on Annabeth. His gaze sharpened. He squinted, then looked back down at the paper. He nudged the man next to him. "That's her," he whispered, the sound carrying clearly in the small store. "Her who?" "The one from the Gazette, from Illinois, the one who lied on Judge Brentwood's son." Annabeth froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin cold and clammy. A woman near the bolts of calico turned, her eyes hard and judgmental. raking over Annabeth from head to toe. A liar, she sniffed. And look what she's traveling with now. Figures. The whispers started, spreading through the store like a sickness. That's the judge's girl, the one he threw out. They say she was, with half the town. And him, another man muttered, jerking his chin at Colton, who had gone rigid, his hand resting on the counter. The cowboy with the scar. Wonder what he paid for her. A runaway whore. The last two words were spoken clearly by the woman at the calico. Annabeth made a small, broken sound in her throat. This was it, the nightmare. It had followed her, even here, into the frozen wilderness. She turned and fled, pushing past the door, stumbling into the muddy, frozen street. She heard the store door slam open behind her. Annabeth! She did not stop. She could not breathe. She had to run. She would rather freeze in the hills than stand there, than be looked at like that, than see the way they looked at him. She had poisoned him with her presence. She was halfway down the street when he caught her. His hand, huge and hard, clamped down on her wrist. She cried out, struggling, trying to pull free. Let me go! Didn't you hear them? Let me go! I heard, he said, his voice a low, furious growl. He did not let go. He pulled her around to face him, his grip like an iron band. His eyes were not flat and gray. They were burning, a fire lit in a winter sky. Let them talk, he snarled, his voice low and for her alone. He gripped her other arm, holding her steady, forcing her to look at him. Let them look. I don't give a damn. They hate me, she wept, her body shaking. They'll hate you. I ain't letting you freeze, he said, his voice raw. I ain't letting you bleed, and I ain't letting you vanish again. He pulled her, hard, against his side. He turned and faced the gawking people who had spilled out of the store to watch. His gaze swept over them, so full of cold menace that the man in the checkered suit took a step back. Colton did not say a word. He simply held Annabeth tight against him and walked her back to the widow's house. A silent, defiant challenge to the entire town. He pushed her into the small room Martha had given them. He did not release her. He backed her against the wall, his hands on her shoulders, his body trapping hers. You don't run, he said. Not from them, and not from me. Do you understand? She stared at him, her breath coming in sobs. She nodded, unable to speak. He searched her face, his gaze desperate. And then his anger broke. He pulled her into his arms, his face burying in her hair. Damn them, he whispered. Damn them all. That night, the tension was back, but it was different. It was the tension of a wire pulled taut, ready to snap. Martha was kind, but the whispers had reached her. She was polite, but the warmth was gone. Annabeth lay on the small cot, feigning sleep. Colton sat in a chair by the door, his rifle leaning against the wall, his head bowed. She knew he was not sleeping. She waited. She waited for hours, her body rigid, until the moon was high and the house was silent, save for the ticking of the mantel clock and the low rumble of Colton's breathing, which had finally evened out. He was asleep. She slipped from the cot. She moved like a ghost, grabbing her worn satchel, her shawl, and her boots. She did not put the boots on. Carrying them in one hand, she eased the door open and slipped into the hallway. She had to save him. She was the poison. She was the one who had brought the shame, the whispers. If she was gone, they would forget him. He could deliver his lumber. He could go north to his land. He could be free. He had saved her life. She would not be the one to ruin his. The cold of the stable shocked her skin. It smelled of hay and horses. She found his roan mule, the strongest of the team. She fumbled with the saddle, her hands shaking so badly she could barely buckle the straps. He's not yours to take. The voice came from the shadows by the door. Annabeth screamed, dropping the saddle. Colton stepped into the moonlight streaming through the single, dirty window. He was in his shirt sleeves, his feet bare on the frozen earth. He had not been asleep. He had been waiting. "Colton, you were leaving," he stated. It was not a question. "I have to," she cried, backing away from him. "You heard them. A whore. That's what I am to them. I won't let them say that about you. I won't bring this on you." He advanced on her, his face a mask of thunder. "You think I care what those half-wits in the store say?" "You will," she sobbed. "When they find out, when he finds me, he'll send men. He won't let me go. They'll hurt you." He stopped, standing directly in her path. He blocked the door. He blocked the world. "I'll fight every bastard out here," he said, his voice low and vibrating with an intensity that shook her to the core. "From here to the Canadian border, but I won't fight you." He reached out, his hands finding her shoulders. His grip was not hard, but it was unyielding. "Please, Annabeth, stay!" The plea broke her. The last of her strength, the last of her resolve, crumbled. She fell against him, her legs giving way, her hands grabbing the front of his shirt. "I can't," she wept into his chest. I can't. You don't know." "Then tell me," he said, his arms coming around her, holding her up. "Tell me all of it, the truth, not just the pieces." He slid down the rough stable wall, pulling her with him, until they were sitting in the straw. He cradled her, his back against the boards, his body shielding her from the cold. And she told him everything, not just that she had been hurt. She told him the name, Elias Brentwood. She told him about the party at the governor's house, the smell of brandy and cigars, the library, the way Elias had locked the door, his smile confident, his eyes cold. She told him how she had fought, how she had scratched his face, how she had broken a decanter over his head. She told him about the trial, how Elias's mother had wept on the stand, swearing her son had been seduced by a forward, godless girl, how the doctor, paid by the judge, testified that her injuries were inconclusive, how her own father, his reputation in tatters, had refused to meet her gaze, how he had given her $100 and told her to never use his name again. She told him about the loneliness, the weeks of hiding in cheap boarding houses, the whispers that followed her, the leering men who thought she was for sale, and the cold, empty dread that had finally driven her to the train station in Montana, seeking an oblivion she could not find. She cried until she was empty, her voice a raw, broken thing, her tears soaking the front of his shirt. He said nothing. He just held her. He rocked her gently, his hand stroking her hair. He absorbed her shame, her pain, her fear, and he did not flinch. He did not offer vengeance. He did not offer solutions. He just held her. When she was finally quiet, a spent, hollowed thing in his arms, he kissed the top of her head. "He ain't finding you," he said, his voice a raw promise. "I won't let him." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him in the dim, cold light. "I have land," he said, his voice thick. "Up north, near the border. Just a piece of timberland. But it's mine. It's quiet. No one will find you there." He swallowed, his gaze searching hers. "You can come, with me, or I'll stay where you are. I don't care. I'm not leaving you." It was not a proposal. It was a statement of fact, like the snow was cold or the sky was blue. He would not leave her. "Colton," she whispered, her hand coming up to touch his scarred cheek. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "Stay," he whispered again. "Just stay." The next morning, they walked out of the widow's house together. Annabeth did not hide her face. She held her head high, her hand tucked firmly in the crook of Colton's arm. The town watched them go. The whispers followed, but they seemed distant now, their sting blunted by the solid warmth of the man beside her. They went to the telegraph office. Colton needed to wire the mine to let them know the lumber would be late. Delayed by the storm. The clerk, a young man with a green eye shade, looked up as they entered. His eyes flickered between them, his face holding the same knowing, judgmental smirk Annabeth had come to despise. "Help you." "I need to send a wire," Colton said. "Right." The clerk turned to his key. Then he paused. "Wait, you just come into town?" "Yesterday." Colton said, "Well, you saved me the trouble of finding you. Got one that came in this morning, addressed to Colton Reed, or the woman, Annabeth Monroe. Figured that had to be you. Caused quite a stir." Annabeth's blood turned to ice. She gripped Colton's arm. The clerk slid a piece of yellow paper across the counter. Colton picked it up. His eyes scanned the few, black words. His body went rigid. Annabeth looked. "Judge's men on Rocky Mountain Express. Arrive Gables Post noon. Stop." Colton's hand did not tremble. It crumpled the yellow paper into a tight, hard ball. He dropped it on the floor. "Colton?" Annabeth's voice was a thin thread of ice. He did not answer. He grabbed her arm, not gently, and pulled her from the office. The clerk, his smirk gone, watched them go. "Martha," Colton said, bursting into the widow's house. She was kneading dough, her hands white with flour. "We're leaving." What is it?" "Men are coming for her." He was already in the small room, grabbing his rifle, his pack. He looked at Annabeth. She was standing frozen in the parlor, her face as white as the flour on Martha's hands. "Annabeth," he barked. "Your things, now!" The command broke her paralysis. She ran, grabbing her satchel. Martha blocked his path at the door. "Colton, what's happening? Who's coming?" "Men who won't be reasoned with," he said, his voice flat and cold. "They'll be on the noon train. That gives us less than 2 hours. We can't take the wagon. It's too slow." "Take the horses," Martha said, untying her apron. "Take my mare. Bess, she's faster than those mules. And take your strongest mule to carry your supplies. Go north, follow the river, then cut west into the high timber. They'll never find you there." "Martha, I can't take your horse." "You will," she said, her kind eyes hard. "Jed would have given you the house. I'm giving you the horse. Now get before I fetch a skillet." He looked at her, his throat working. He nodded once, a sharp, grateful jerk of his head. "I'll send money for her." "You'll send word you're safe," she corrected. "Go, out the back." They did not run down the main street. They ran through Martha's frozen garden to the stable. In 5 minutes, they were saddled. Colton on Martha's strong bay mare, Annabeth on his roan mule, the most sure-footed of his team. The other mules in the wagon, with its load of lumber, were left behind. He had strapped his bedroll and their meager supplies to the saddle. He leaned down from the saddle, his hand on Annabeth's shoulder. "Hold tight. Don't look back. Just follow me." They rode out of Gables Post, not on the trail, but cutting straight north, up the embankment and into the thick, snow-laden pines. They did not look back. They rode for hours. The terrain was a brutal, unforgiving thing. They left the foothills and entered a landscape that felt scarred. Ancient, they crossed ice-covered rivers, the animals snorting in terror as the ice cracked and groaned beneath their weight. The water was black and fast, and more than once the mare stumbled, sending a jolt of panic through Annabeth. But Colton's hand was always there, grabbing the mule's bridle, his voice a low, steady rumble that calmed the animals. That calmed her. By evening, they entered a burnt forest. It was a skeletal, haunted place. A wildfire from the summer before had ravaged the mountainside, leaving miles of nothing but blackened, needleless spars pointing at the sky. The snow was a pristine white blanket on the ground, and sticking up from it were the black, charred bones of the trees. It was a graveyard, and in this graveyard they saw them. Annabeth saw them first. She had been looking back, a nervous habit she could not break. Far below them, winding through the same black and white maze, were 3 riders. They were dark figures, but one detail stood out, a flash of color against the desolation. They wore scarves, bright, blood-red scarves. "Colton," she whispered, her voice seizing. He had already seen them. His body was rigid, his gaze fixed on the men below. "They're fast," he said, his voice grim. "Riding hard. They must have gotten fresh horses in town. What do we do?" "We ride." They pushed the animals, climbing higher into the burnt woods. The mare was strong, but the mule was slowing, its breath coming in heaving clouds. The men were gaining. They were not following their tracks. They knew this land, or were being guided. They were cutting them off. The first shot came as dusk was settling, the world turning a deep, bruised purple. The sound was not a loud crack. It was a sharp, flat whip that echoed off the burnt trees, followed by the high, thin whine of the bullet. It passed so close to Annabeth's head that she felt the air move. She screamed. The mule shied, nearly throwing her. "Get down," Colton yelled. He was off the mare in an instant, dragging Annabeth from the mule's back, pulling her behind the massive, fallen trunk of a burnt pine. The animals, terrified, scattered a few yards away. Another shot. This one struck the log they hid behind, sending a spray of charred wood and ice splinters into the air. "They're too far for a pistol," Colton said, his voice calm, assessing. He unslung his rifle. "They have long guns. They'll try to pin us here until dark, then rush us." He peered over the log. 2 of them are fanning out. The 3rd is staying put. The shooter. He looked at Annabeth. She was huddled against the snow, her body shaking, her eyes wide with a terror that was absolute. "I'm going to draw his fire," he said, his voice low and steady. "When I do, I want you to run to that cluster of rocks, 40 yards to our left. Understand?" "No," she wept. "No, Colton, I won't leave you." "You are not leaving me. You are moving to better cover. Now do it." He looked at her, his eyes hard. "Annabeth, do it." He didn't wait for her answer. He took his hat, put it on the end of his rifle, and slowly raised it above the log. The shot was immediate. The hat flew from the barrel. A clean hole punched through the felt. "Now!" Colton roared. Annabeth scrambled to her feet and ran, slipping, falling to her knees, getting up again. She plunged through the snow, her lungs burning, the burnt trees like silent, judging specters around her. She heard the rifle crack again. She heard a grunt, a sound of impact. She did not dare look back. She threw herself behind the rocks, her face scraping against the cold, rough granite. She lay gasping, her heart hammering. "Colton!" she screamed, her voice thin. He was there, stumbling, half sliding through the snow, his rifle in one hand. He fell in beside her, his body shielding hers. "I'm here," he gasped, but his voice was wrong. It was tight, strained. She saw it then, the dark, wet stain spreading across the shoulder of his coat, the left arm. "You're hit," she whispered, her hand flying to his arm. "It's nothing," he grunted, pushing her hand away, trying to raise his rifle. "Just a graze." "It's not nothing," she cried. "You're bleeding." "Stay down," he ordered. He braced the rifle on the rock, his left arm useless at his side. He tried to aim one-handed, his face pale and slick with sweat in the fading light. "We can't stay here," Annabeth said, her mind suddenly terribly clear. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "They're circling. We have to move." "I know." He gritted his teeth, his gaze scanning the ridge above them. "The pass. There's a canyon pass, a mile north, narrow. We can make a stand there, if we can get to the animals." He looked at her, his gray eyes full of a pain he would not voice. "Can you get to the mare?" She nodded. Good girl. Get her. Bring her here. I'll cover you. He raised his rifle, took aim at the distant flash of a red scarf, and fired. The shot was a cover, not a true aim. Annabeth ran. She ran, low and fast, back to the animals. The mule was standing, trembling. The mare, Bess, was tougher. Annabeth grabbed their reins. She did not lead them. She vaulted onto the mule's back, pulling the mare behind her, and rode them back to the rocks. Colton was slumped, his head against the granite. His face was white. Colton! He pushed himself up, his teeth bared. Get me on the horse. She slid off the mule, her hands under his good arm. He was a dead weight. He pushed himself up, his body groaning in protest, and somehow, with her pulling and him pushing, he got his boot into the stirrup and hauled himself onto the mare. He swayed in the saddle, but he stayed on. Go, he bit out. North, fast as you can. She scrambled back onto the mule, and they rode. Two desperate, fleeing shadows in a black and white forest, leaving a small, dark patch of blood on the snow behind them. They made it to the canyon pass an hour later. It was full dark. The moon was a cold, silver sliver, offering just enough light to see. The pass was a deep, narrow split in the rock, barely wide enough for a wagon, with sheer, 100-foot walls. Colton slid from the mare, his body hitting the ground hard. He did not get up. Annabeth was at his side, tearing at the buttons of his coat. Let me see. No time. He was breathing in short, hard gasps. There is time, she cried, her voice echoing in the narrow space. They won't come in here in the dark. They'll wait for morning. Let me see. She pulled the coat and the blood-soaked shirt away. The bullet had torn a long, ugly gash across the muscle of his shoulder and upper arm. It was deep. It was bleeding badly, but it had passed through. It's a graze, he muttered, his head falling back against the snow. It is not a graze. She ripped a long strip from her petticoat, her hands trembling so violently she could barely tie the knot. She packed the snow into the cloth and pressed it, hard, against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. He cried out, a low animal sound, and his hand, his good hand, shot out, gripping her wrist. His grip was iron. I'm sorry, she wept. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. It's all right, he forced out. His eyes squeezed shut. It's all right. Tie it tight. She bound the arm, her movements clumsy, her tears freezing on her cheeks. When she was done, he was shivering, his body shaking with cold and shock. She covered him with the bedroll, with his own coat. She built a small, smokeless fire, shielding it with rocks, and melted snow in the tin cup. She made him drink. He lay there, watching her. You should go, he whispered, his voice thin. What? She stopped, her hands full of twigs. Take the mare. She's fast. Ride north. Don't stop. I am not leaving you. She said it with a finality that mirrored his own. Annabeth, he said, his voice raw. There are 3 of them. I'm wounded. You can't stay. I am not leaving you, she repeated. She knelt beside him, her face inches from his. We are not running, not anymore. This ain't running, he argued, trying to push himself up. This is smart. No? She put her hand on his chest, gently pushing him back down. I am tired of running. I am tired of being afraid. She looked down the dark, narrow canyon. You said we'd make a stand. We'll make it here. He stared at her, at the set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. This was not the terrified girl from the train station. This was not the weeping victim in the stable. This was someone new. They'll kill us, he said, stating a fact. They'll kill us, she agreed. Not me, not you, us. I will not die alone in the snow. Colton, and neither will you. A faint, pained smile touched his lips. He raised his good hand and touched her cheek. All right, he whispered. All right, we'll make a stand. He closed his eyes. In the morning. They'll come. They'll come one at a time. It's too narrow. I'll be behind those rocks. At the bend. They won't see me until it's too late. And me. You, he said, his eyes opening, sharp and clear despite the pain. You will be here, with the animals, out of sight. You will not move. You will not make a sound. When it's done, if it's done, I'll come for you. Colton, I can... No, you will stay put. That's the only way this works. I have to know you are safe. Swear it. She looked at him, at the desperation in his eyes. He needed this. He needed to be the protector. I swear, she lied. Before dawn, he was awake. He was pale, his movements stiff, but he was on his feet. He drank the last of the coffee, his good hand shaking slightly. He checked his rifle. He checked his pistol. Then he looked at her. He pulled her to him, his good arm wrapping around her, holding her tight. He began. I know, she whispered, her arms around his waist, feeling the heat of his fevered body. Me too. He kissed her. It was a hard, desperate kiss. It was a kiss of fear, and of promise, and of goodbye. Then he took a small skinning knife from his belt. Take this, he said, pressing it into her hand. Just in case. He turned and walked, his back straight, to the bend in the canyon. He settled himself between two high boulders, his rifle resting on the rock, aimed down the narrow path, and he waited. Annabeth waited, too. She hid with the animals behind a jumble of fallen rock. The knife was cold in her hand. The sun began to rise, painting the tops of the canyon walls a brilliant, painful orange. She heard them before she saw them, the crunch of horses' hooves on snow, a low voice, muttering. They came as he said they would, one at a time. The first man was broad, confident. He rode in, his rifle across his lap, his red scarf a garish splash of color. He passed the bend. The single shot was so loud in the canyon it felt like a physical blow. The man was thrown backward from his horse, his arms flying wide. The horse screamed, rearing, and bolted back the way it had come. Silence. A long, agonizing silence. Then a voice. He's in the rocks! Boss, he's in the rocks! Another voice, calmer, colder. He's one man, and he's hit. I saw the blood back at the forest. Flank him. Eli, I'll draw his fire. Annabeth heard a horse scrambling, the sound of hooves on rock. They were climbing. One was trying to get above him. The second man rode into the canyon. This one bent low over his horse's neck, galloping full out. He fired his pistol wildly at the rocks where Colton hid. Colton fired once. The horse went down, its legs folding, sending the rider tumbling over its head. The man slid, his body limp, and did not move. 2. The silence returned, but it was different. It was a waiting silence. The third man, the boss, was still out there, and Eli was on the ridge. Annabeth's heart was a cold stone. Colton was trapped, one man in front, one man above. She looked at the knife in her hand. I swear, she had lied. She grabbed the mare's reins. I'm sorry, Bess, she whispered. She slapped the horse, hard on the rump. Go, get! The mare, panicked, bolted from the rocks, galloping out of the canyon, back toward the entrance. What the hell? The voice of the third man was sharp, confused. Annabeth did not wait. She ran, not toward Colton, but away from him, deeper into the canyon. She scrambled up the loose scree, her hands raw, climbing the wall opposite the one Eli was on. She had to make a target. She had to draw one of them away. There's the girl! It was the man on the ridge. Eli. She's getting away. Damn it! Forget Reed, get the girl, the boss shouted. She heard them coming, both of them. The man on the ridge was faster, scrambling down. The boss was on his horse, riding into the canyon. She had nowhere to go. She was trapped on a ledge, 20 feet up. The man on the ridge, Eli, was below her now. He was young, his face thin. He grinned when he saw her. "Well, look at this. Come on down, sweetheart. The boss wants to talk to you." He started to climb, his rifle slung on his back. "Stay away from me!" Annabeth screamed, brandishing the small knife. He laughed. "That little thing? Put it down. Don't make this." He lunged, grabbing her ankle. She screamed and kicked, but he was strong. He pulled her from the ledge. She fell, tumbling down the rocks, landing hard on her back in the snow. The air was knocked from her lungs. Before she could move, he was on her, his knee pinning her chest, his hand grabbing her wrist, twisting it until she cried out and the knife fell from her numb fingers. "Now, you're coming with me," he snarled. "Get off her!" The voice was not Eli's. It was the boss. He was sitting on his horse, a tall, cold-looking man in a black duster, his red scarf neat. He was looking down at them. "Get up, Eli! She's not for you!" "But, boss..." "Get up. We'll take her. Reed will follow. We'll get him in the open." Eli grinned, pulling Annabeth to her feet. He dragged her, one arm twisted behind her back, and threw her against the canyon wall. Then the third man saw him. Colton was standing at the canyon bend. He was not behind the rocks. He was in the open, his pistol in his good hand, aimed, but he was not aiming at them. He was aiming at the horse the boss sat on. "Let her go," Colton said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the canyon. The boss laughed. "You'd shoot my horse? You're a dead man. Reed, Eli, put a bullet in him." Eli raised his rifle. But the boss had misjudged. Colton didn't shoot the horse. He shot the rock above the horse. The shot, the impact, the sudden crack of splitting granite and the shower of ice and stone, it was enough. The horse screamed, reared, and in that one chaotic second, Annabeth moved. The boss was fighting his horse. Eli was distracted. Annabeth grabbed the knife from the snow. She did not lunge at Eli. She lunged at the boss. He was the one in control. She slammed her body against his leg and drove the knife, with all her strength, into his thigh, just above the knee. The man roared, a sound of pure agony. His hand went to his leg, his pistol forgotten. Eli turned, his eyes wide, his rifle coming around. He never had the chance. Colton's pistol fired. Eli was thrown back against the rock, his red scarf a sudden, bright bloom against the gray stone. He slid down, leaving a smear, and was still. The boss was cursing, trying to get the knife out of his leg, trying to control his frantic horse. Colton walked forward, his steps steady, his pistol never wavering. He stopped 10 feet from the man. "Get off the horse," Colton said. The man, his face white with pain and rage, looked from Colton's unyielding face to the pistol, and then to Annabeth, who was standing, panting, the man's blood on her hands. He let himself fall from the saddle. He landed hard, his wounded leg collapsing under him. Colton did not look at him. He looked at Annabeth. "You all right?" She could only nod, her body shaking in violent, uncontrollable waves. Colton turned his gaze back to the man on the ground. The man was staring at his own blood, spreading dark and hot on the white snow. The wind began to pick up, a low, mournful sound winding through the canyon. It was the only sound. The silence of the aftermath was worse than the gunfire. They buried them. They did not speak. Colton, his left arm bound uselessly to his side, used his good arm to move the heavy rocks, piling them over the 3 bodies in a shallow cleft. Annabeth helped, her hands raw, her mind numb. It took hours. The sun was setting again when they finished. 3 piles of stones, 3 red scarves, tossed onto the grave. Annabeth knelt by the last grave. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She was covered in dirt, and in another man's blood. She looked at the rocks. She looked at her hands.
"This is the last time I run?"
She whispered. The words were for her, for the wind. She felt, more than heard, him move behind her. He knelt in the snow. She looked at him. His face was a mask of exhaustion, pain, and something else, something broken. "Annabeth," he said, his voice cracking. The iron was gone. Tears, sudden and hot, welled in his eyes. They traced paths through the grime on his face. We don't have to run anymore." He reached out his good hand, not to touch her, but just holding it in the space between them, trembling. "I'm tired," he whispered, a confession that was torn from the deepest part of him. "God, I'm so tired. I don't want to. I just want a home. With you." He broke, the man of rock and ice, the man who had held back the blizzard and the bullets. He broke. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. She did not hesitate. She moved to him, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling his head to her shoulder. She held him, his body shaking against hers, and let him weep. She held him for his brother, for the fire, for the men they had just buried, for the sheer, bone-deep weariness of a life lived in pain. When he was still, he pulled back. He looked at her, his eyes raw. She raised her hand, her bloody, trembling hand, and she touched his face. She laid her palm against his scarred cheek. She traced the line that marked him, not as a flaw, but as a map of the man she knew. "Then let's go build one," she said. The snows of that first long winter were deeper than any Colton had ever seen. They had pushed north, past the burnt forest, beyond the reach of telegraph lines and judges' men into the high timber country Martha Thorne had spoken of. They found the land Colton owned, a broad slope of pine and aspen near a creek that ran fast and clear. They survived. They had the mare and the mule, his rifle, and the small bag of supplies. The winter was a hard, white siege. They dug a shelter into the side of a hill, lining it with pine boughs. A half-cave, half-tent made of canvas and animal hides he managed to trap. It was a brutal, primitive existence, huddled together for warmth, melting snow for water. Their world shrunk to the few feet around their smoky fire. But they were together. The hardship was a forge, burning away the last of their old lives. There were no whispers here, no trials, no accusations. There was only the cold, the snow, and the quiet, steady presence of each other. He hunted. She mended their clothes until they were more patched than fabric, and she learned to clean the rabbits and grouse he brought back, her hands no longer shaking at the sight of blood. His arm healed slowly. The cold settled into the wound, and some nights, the pain made him clench his jaw in silence. She would wake and find him sitting up, staring into the fire, his good hand massaging the scarred muscle. She would take over, her own hands, chapped and rough, kneading the rigid flesh, easing the ache he refused to name. He, in turn, cared for her. When the wind brought back the sound of the wolves, closer this time, and she tensed in her sleep, he would pull the furs tighter around her, his body a solid, warm wall against her back. He was her shield. And then, slowly, the world began to thaw. Spring came not as a gentle arrival, but as a violent breaking. The ice on the creek cracked with sounds like cannon shot. The snow melted in great, rushing torrents, turning their small valley into a muddy swamp. The air grew warmer, filled with the smell of damp earth and sharp, new pine. They had survived, and now they began to live. The cabin rose log by log. Colton chose the trees, felling them with his axe, his left arm still weak but his resolve like iron. He was building. His hands, which he had once sworn only destroyed, were creating. He was not burning a barn, he was raising a home. Annabeth worked beside him. She learned to score the logs, to fit them. She gathered moss and mud, chinking the spaces between the timbers. Her hands, her dress, her hair caked in the thick, rich earth. She was sealing their walls against the world. It was a small cabin, just one room, like the trapper's hut. But this was not a prison. This was a sanctuary. It had a sturdy roof, a floor of smooth planed planks, and a stone fireplace that Colton built with a skill she had not known he possessed. It drew perfectly, the smoke rising clean and straight into the blue mountain air. While he built, she planted. She cleared a small patch of land near the creek, where the soil was black and fertile. She turned it with a broken shovel head he had fashioned for her, her hands digging into the cold, damp ground. Martha Thorne had pressed a small cloth sack into her hand before they fled. Seeds, potatoes, hardy beans, corn, and a small packet of herbs. Annabeth knelt in the dirt, planting them one by one. She was putting down roots. She, who had been torn up and thrown away, was placing a piece of herself in the earth, daring it to grow. Their days fell into a rhythm. He would rise before dawn, check his traps, and then work on the cabin or hunt. She would tend her small, precious garden, cook their meals, and mend. In the evenings, they would sit on the new, rough-hewn porch he had built. The land was theirs. The silence was theirs. It was a silence that was full, not empty. It was the sound of the wind in the high pines, the rush of the creek, the call of an eagle that nested on the high rocks above them. There was no town. There was no gossip. There were no judges, no trial, no past. There was only the hard, good work of living. But the past was not a thing that could be buried under stones and forgotten. It lived in them. It was a part of the grain, like the scars on his face, or the memory in her hands. Annabeth still had the dreams. She would be in the courtroom, the air thick and hot, the whispers rising like the sound of snakes. She would see Elias Brentwood's smile, that confident, cruel twist of his lips. She would feel the hands on her, pulling her, dragging her. She would try to scream, but no sound would come. She would wake with a gasp, her body rigid, the sheets twisted in her fists. And he would be there. He would not speak. He would not ask what she had seen. He would simply turn, his own sleep broken, and pull her against him. He would lay his scarred, calloused hand flat against her back, a solid, unmoving weight. He would hold her, his breathing slow and steady, until the hammering of her heart slowed to match his. He would hold her until the images faded, until the cold sweat dried, until she was no longer in a courtroom in Illinois, but in a cabin in the high woods, safe in her husband's arms. He had his own ghosts. The fire. Some nights, Annabeth would wake to the smell of smoke when there was none. She would wake to find him gone from the bed. She would find him standing at the open cabin door, staring out into the moonlit darkness, his broad back shaking. He would be gasping for air, his hand gripping the doorframe so hard his knuckles were white. He was breathing in the clean, cold night, but in his mind, he was breathing smoke. He was hearing a sound she could not, the cry of a boy trapped in a burning barn. She would rise from the bed, the rough linen shift she had sewn falling to her ankles. She would not speak. She would not startle him. She would simply come up behind him and slide her arms around his waist. She would press her face against his back, against the puckered, ropey scars the fire had left there. She would hold him. She would trace the ruined skin with her fingertips, a gentle, loving touch that did not erase the past, but acknowledged it, a touch that anchored him. He would cover her hands with his own, his body rigid, his breathing ragged. She would just hold on, silent and unmoving, until the tremors passed, until he was no longer a guilty boy in a barnyard, but a man in his own home. He would lean his head back against hers, his body heavy, and she would lead him back to bed. Their lovemaking had a quality of reverence. It was almost always in silence, by the light of the fire. The first few times, after that night in the trapper's cabin, their hands had still trembled. His, with the fear of breaking her. Hers, with the fear of being broken. But that fear had faded. The trembling was still there, but it was no longer from fear. It was from need, from a deep, quiet knowledge of what the other had endured. He was gentle. His touch was a question, always. His hands, so strong they could fell a tree, would trace the line of her jaw, her throat, her shoulder, as if he were memorizing her. He was still the man who was afraid of his own fire, but she was the one who was not afraid of his heat. She was no longer the frightened girl. She would meet his touch with her own. She would kiss the scars on his face, on his chest, on his arm. She was healing him with her acceptance, just as he was healing her with his patience. They were two jagged, broken pieces, but they had learned to fit together. They were no longer afraid. They were just gentle. One afternoon, late in the summer, a man rode into their valley. Annabeth was weeding her garden, her knees in the dirt. When she heard the horse, she shot to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat, her hand instinctively reaching for the hoe. Colton came out of the cabin, his rifle in his hand. He did not raise it. He just held it, his body relaxed but ready. The rider was an old man, thin as a rail, with a long white beard. He rode a mule and was leading another, piled high with mail bags. "Howdy," the rider called out, stopping a safe distance away. "Didn't mean to spook you. Name's Silas. I'm the post rider. Only come this way twice a year." He looked at the cabin, the neat garden, the plume of smoke. "Heard someone had settled up here. Glad to see it. This is hard country to be alone in." Colton nodded, lowering the rifle slightly. "Colton Reed. This is my wife, Annabeth." The word hung in the air. Wife. He had never said it aloud to another soul. Annabeth felt a flush of heat rise in her throat. "Pleasure," Silas said. He rummaged in his bag. "Got a letter here. Came to Gable's post months ago. Widow Thorne. She asked me to bring it. Said she figured you'd be somewhere up this creek." He held it out. Colton did not move. Annabeth walked forward slowly, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. She took the letter. The envelope was fine. Expensive linen. The handwriting was her mother's. It was addressed to Annabeth Monroe, at the post office in Gable's Post. She stared at it. It felt heavy, like a stone. It was a piece of the world they had fled, a world that had no place here. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No trouble," Silas said. "Going to camp down by the fork tonight. Be heading back at sunrise if you got anything going out." "We don't," Colton said. The post rider nodded, tipped his hat, and rode away. Annabeth stood for a long time, just holding the envelope. Colton came and stood beside her. He did not ask what it was. He did not tell her to open it. He just waited. She tore it open. The letter was short. Her mother's script was shaky, the ink slightly blurred. It was not a letter of reconciliation. It was a letter of duty. "Annabeth, I feel it is my Christian obligation to inform you that your father passed from this world on the 4th of April. He died of a sickness of the heart, brought on by grief. I hope you are satisfied. The Judge Brentwood also passed from a stroke. Just last week, his son, Elias, has vanished. Some say he fled west to avoid his gambling debts. The family's reputation is in ruins. I pray you find repentance for the shame you have brought upon us all." Annabeth read it twice. Her hands were shaking. She felt nothing, not grief, not satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. The men who had destroyed her, they were gone. One dead of a broken heart, one of a broken mind, one vanished into the same wilderness that had saved her. She looked at Colton. He was watching her, his face taut with concern. She walked to the small fire she kept for the midday meal. She stared at the letter, at her mother's name, at the last poisonous words. She held it over the flames. The corner blackened, curled, and caught. The fire consumed the words, turning the judgment and the shame into gray, floating ash. "We're free," she whispered. Colton put his arm around her, pulling her against his side. He watched the last of the letter disappear. He kissed her hair. "Yes," he said, "we are." That night, they lay on the porch, wrapped in a single, heavy blanket. The summer sky was vast and clear. A spray of stars so thick it looked like spilled salt. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and the wood smoke from their chimney. Annabeth lay with her head on his chest, her hand tracing the scar on his arm. He was carving. He was always carving. He was working on a small, smooth piece of aspen.
What is it?
She asked, her voice sleepy. "A bird," he murmured. "For the mantle." She was quiet for a long time, listening to the night sounds, to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart beneath her ear. The peace she felt was so complete, so total, it almost frightened her. This, she thought, this is home. This is the place I was running to, even when I didn't know it. "Colton," she said, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the night. "Hmm?" She lifted her head, looking at him in the starlight. He was watching her, his gray eyes gentle.
"I love you,"
she said. The words were new. She had never spoken them. They were her final, absolute truth. He did not seem surprised. He did not say it back. He just smiled. A slow, small smile that crinkled the scar by his eye. He raised his good hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I knew it," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "I knew it when you first climbed up in my wagon." He knew her strength. He had seen it from the very beginning. He had not seen a victim, or a runaway, or a whore. He had seen her. She smiled, a tear slipping from the corner of her eye. She leaned in. He met her halfway. They kissed, wrapped in blankets as the sun began to set, the last light painting the wild land they now called home. Thank you for listening to our story. We hope it brought a little bit of the Wild West to you. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave us a comment below. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this, and let us know your thoughts in English. We read every one.